Advanced technology and miserable lives. That is the essence of cyberpunk. Ingenious. For decades, sci-fi writers, directors, screenwriters, and video game studios have been creating stories about a near future in which digital technology and immersion in virtual reality is universal and have exacerbated society's vices and the vices of each individual. As a result, the genre has become synonymous with warnings that progress without ethics and humanity will lead to a future where people are slaves to machines and technology. This idea was especially popular in the 80s and 90s. Blockbuster hits such as Blade Runner, The Lawnmower Man, Nirvana, The Matrix, The 13th Floor, and of course Robocop were released in this era. Today we are talking about the last movie, Robocop. Actually, we will try to figure out why the franchise that started off so well at the box office flopped so hard after the success of the first movie. Robocop is a cult classic. However, as is the case with many iconic films, Robocop was the product of many disagreements. Nobody liked the original script and it was rewritten over and over again. The producers offered the script to many directors, but they said they were busy. The rumors are that it was hard to find someone to take on the lead role because nobody wanted to be in a tin can suit for the entire movie. The producers even wanted to offer it to Arnold Schwarzenegger for a crazy high fee to give the movie some star appeal. But they got over this idea as they thought that Arnold's huge physique in the Robocop suit would look too comical. The director, Paul Verhoeven, initially turned the project down. Apparently, it was his wife who convinced him to do it. She convinced him that Robocop was more than just a simple action movie, as Verhoeven thought at first. His wife convinced him that with a bit of work, he could turn Robocop into the kind of film he would want to see. Later down the road, Paul would admit that he almost turned the film down due to being narrow-minded and could have ruined it. The thing is that in the original script, Robocop was supposed to move gracefully like a cat, but it turned out that doing this in an 18-kilogram suit was impossible. The special effects crew suggested slowing Robocop down, making him like a human tank. Verhoeven did not like this idea though. However, Peter Weller, who was already part of the team, supported the idea of slowing him down. After hearing the opinion of the leading actor, the director agreed. Paul Verhoeven often remembers how he almost sabotaged the movie with his doubts, as the film turned out to be amazing. At first, Verhoeven wanted Rutger Hauer, who he had worked with on Flesh and Blood, to play the protagonist. However, you could hardly say they had an ideal working relationship, as they had a big falling out during the shoot. But the director hoped that Hauer would agree to do it. The actor either didn't like the project or hadn't gotten over his dispute with the director. Either way, he turned the project down. So, Peter Weller was chosen for the role at the last minute. Even though half of Hollywood had turned this role down, Peter could still have lost the role even after shooting had begun. The Robocop costume was not originally designed with Weller in mind, and he had to sweat in the sweltering heat on set. He kept asking if they could add air conditioning to the suit, as wearing 18 kilos of equipment for several hours a day was unbearable, especially in August when it was 40 degrees Celsius. He said in an interview that by the end of the working day, he lost about a kilogram in water weight. The producers just shrugged their shoulders. After a while, Weller's complaints became too much for them and they tried to replace him. They offered the role to Lance Henriksen. However, he didn't have the time to take the project on, so the producers finally acquiesced and fitted an air conditioner to the suit. Robocop's appearance was constantly changing. They spent around $1 million on the costume. Rob Bottin's team worked on the costume for months, but after all the changes and do-overs, they returned to the first incarnation. In addition to the main suit, there were 6 others. One made of fire-resistant fiber, made for stuntmen who filmed the scene with the exploding gas station. There were also 2 made especially for fight scenes and for dealing with a barrage of bullets from the Detroit police. There were then 3 backup costumes that were also used. Robocop could not fit into a regular car as his legs were too bulky, so they planned to make a car with more space in the interior, but they didn't go through with it as they were running out of their budget for the film. They already had to pay for several cop cars as Ford refused to provide free cars due to the amount of blood and violence in the film. The first 3 films had the same sound effects. To make the heaving footstep sound, they used a chain. They used a whistle and videotape for the head movements, a guitar pedal for the voice, and many more things to enhance the soundscape. After several cuts of the film were rejected, Robocop was finally released. Verhoeven kept cutting bloody scenes from the movie. The film still had a lot of brutality though. After all of the problems the team faced, it was finally released in the US. However, it was released on the same day as Jaws and seemed to suffer in the shadow of the success of Jaws. Robocop cost twice as much to make than the 4th installment of Jaws, but in the end it came out on top against the battle with the Great White Shark. The film had a budget of $13 million and grossed $53 million in the US alone. They had a green light to start working on the second movie and avoid the mistakes they made on the first one, but not everything went so smoothly. Paul Verhoeven turned the film down at first because he felt that his creativity was restricted. The script opens with Robocop being destroyed and rebuilt 25 years later. The director didn't like this idea. He says that was his main reason for turning the project down. Meanwhile, Schwarzenegger approached him with the script for Total Recall. Arnold offered the director complete creative freedom on the condition that he gave an answer within 3 hours. So, he left Robocop behind to work on a new project. The producers ordered a new script from Frank Miller and hired Tim Hunter to direct the movie, who was known for his work on River's Edge. Hunter enthusiastically started working on the project and made several changes to the scripts, but the producers didn't like this. The producers and the director had many disagreements, and then Hunter walked away from the project. The job was then offered to Alex Cox, but after reading Frank Miller's script, he turned the offer down. He felt that the script was too serious. The job was then offered to Irwin Kershner, known for Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back and Never Say Never Again. He also made a lot of changes to the script to the extent that there was no trace of the original script left. Frank Miller came to set every day, and after a month, he no longer recognized the film that was being made because the script had changed so much. The producers later claimed that their reason for changing the script was not that it was bad, but because they didn't have the budget to bring the ideas of the original script to life. In 2003, the Robocop comic book was released that followed Frank Miller's original script. The second installment of the Robocop franchise was released in June 1990 and was the second biggest box office hit after Dick Tracy. The film had a budget of $35 million, 3 times that of the first film, and grossed $45 million in the US. This was a huge disappointment for everyone involved as they failed to surpass the success of the first movie, even with the amount of money they put into it. To add salt to the wound, Verhoeven's Total Recall stayed in the top 10 in the ratings long after Robocop 2 had already fallen out of the top 10. Total Recall grossed $120 million in the US, significantly more than Robocop 2. This put Paul Verhoeven in the limelight and made the producers regret not working harder to persuade him to work on the second movie. Although the second movie was a flop, Orion Studio ordered a third film. The global box office probably helped the film make a small profit, and Orion helped to bounce back on the third movie. In the 80s, the studio was renowned for its flops, but they did not quit. In order to avoid bankruptcy, the studio sold the international distribution rights to its films for $175 million in 1990. Almost all of their movies flopped, but there were 2 hits in the 90s, The Silence of the Lambs and Dances with Wolves. The films made a lot of money in the US and abroad, but Orion didn't see any of it. It all went to Sony. And since Kevin Costner put up part of the budget for Dances with Wolves, a third of the income went to him. Despite the success of these 2 movies, Orion made a pittance and could not cover the costs of all of the box office flops. The studio overestimated their success based on the first movie. After the failure of the sequel, everything got worse. They decided to go ahead with the third movie anyway. Peter Weller supported the idea of a third film and even met with director Fred Decker to discuss some of the details. However, he was then offered the leading role in Naked Lunch and agreed to do the movie. The failing studio decided it would be better to replace Weller rather than postponing the production of the movie. The role was offered to Robert John Burke. The script was revised and some great action scenes were dropped simply because the studio didn't have the budget to shoot them. The third movie cost $20 million. When the film was finished, the studio went bankrupt. They had no money left over for special effects, so Robocop 3 was shelved. A year later, the studio gathered $2 million for special effects. The film was released in 1993 with no marketing campaign and cheap effects. It grossed $10 million in the States and was released straight to video in most overseas markets. The film that was supposed to save Orion Studios turned out to be its final release. Nobody thought that they would see Robocop back on the big screen, but our metallic friend returned to the streets of Detroit after 11 years. In 2014, Sony, who now owned the rights to Robocop, tried to relaunch the franchise to disappointing results. The film made a profit with a budget of $100 million and a profit of $200 million. The issue was that the remake bore almost no resemblance to the 1987 original that everyone loved. Robocop was no longer a slow-moving, clumsy giant, but a sharp and fast superhuman. Furthermore, the new version focuses too much on the theme of a person who was turned into a machine against his will, coming to terms with his new reality, which takes away the more subtle irony and drama of the original. All in all, it led Robocop to oblivion. The only hope is that in the last few years, rumors of another remake have been more frequent. I would like to recall a moment from Robocop 2. There is a scene where Robocop gets trapped by some guys from a drug drug cartel. The crooks take him out with a huge crane with a magnet attached to it and chain him to a table. Robocop watches helplessly as his metal body is torn apart by jackhammers and saws. The crooks take his body apart and discard it near a police station as a warning to others. It seemed like Robocop was done for, but he is put back together and fights back. I want to believe that this can be done with a franchise, that a team that truly loves Robocop will take the small details that made it so great and put it back together again to show the world what Robocop is capable of.